now to make a transition. We're going to, one of the elements of the transition is to go from a veteran of the University of Prince Edward Island to a relative newcomer for our second speaker, Dr. Juergen Krause from the School of Business. He didn't start off in the business world. He earned his master's degree in chemistry and a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Konstanz in Germany, and did postdoc studies at the University of Chicago. Before moving into education, in the post-secondary setting, he spent 22 years in the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industry, working for Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals in Europe and also for Millennium Pharmaceuticals in Cambridge, Massachusetts as Vice President, Research and Development, Strategy and Operations. During his career in the pharmaceutical world, he served in several different operational and strategic capacities, holding senior and executive positions in research and development, manufacturing and quality management, project management, pipeline and portfolio management, and strategy development too. And then he experienced a change in his life, which brought him into the post-secondary world of education and into a world in which he is able to take that knowledge and contribute to the expansion and development and hopefully prosperity of our own island economy. He joined the faculty of the UPEI School of Business in just July of 2008 as an associate professor in primarily teaching in the field of biotech management, which is the focus of this talk today. And I always like the blend of business and art, the art of clustering in the biotech way. Dr. Krause.
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable ministers and deputies, my pleasure to be up here. As you heard, I'm only in the university for about a year, so I can't look back as far as Rick on conducting research and presenting results, but I'll give you a little blend of what I learned in my professional life, in the industry, and in my academic life since I'm here at UPEI, and I hope it'll be interesting for you. Clusters. Now, clusters are a very old thing, and in the 1700s, clusters were discovered mostly as assemblies of stars, and admittedly, they are a lot prettier to look at than the clusters we have in our business world, but I think I have to explain also a little bit what biotechnology is, not only clusters. There's a lot of things we would like to do which we can't do today. The drug corn has not been developed yet. But there's also a lot of things we can do. We don't have the perfect application yet. Now, I was thinking if we could make the bitter grapes glow, then it would be very easy, so that would be a nice application here. What are clusters? Clusters are geographic concentrations of interconnected companies in a particular field. And that field doesn't need to be biotechnology. There's automotive clusters. The textile industry, mostly in China, is clustered in certain areas, so they realize advantages of being in a close geographic connection. And in many cases, there's also the specialized suppliers, service providers, and associated institutions like university, education, research, and trade associations connected to these clusters or even integrated in the cluster. Knowledge requires proximity, regular face-to-face interactions, and trust in order to be efficiently communicated. Now, what you will see in those clusters, they are humming in terms of the social environment. Those people meet for lunch, and you have usually, from my experience, 5, 6 companies in the same restaurant on different tables, so you always have to be very careful not to talk about business, because you may give away something you don't want to. It can take decades or enormous investment to grow a mature cluster. If you look at the cluster in San Francisco, it started in 1976 with Genentech being founded, and it started in the Boston area in about 1978 with Biogen, and then 1981 with Genzyme. So these clusters have developed over a long period of time. The components, which I explained before, usually have a horizontal component, which is the affiliated institutions, companies, and government, and they have a vertical component, which is the suppliers feeding into the cluster and the customers taking out of the cluster. So all these interact in a very close environment, And if we look at today's world, and this is from 2006, if you would take the same snapshot today, you would see a lot more black dots in this area. Brown at that time was the growth areas where you had the most growth of clusters. And that was certainly in North America, in Europe, and in some parts of Asia. But today, that picture would change significantly. In the Pudong district in China, for instance, they have now 3,600 companies in one cluster: technology, IT, biotech, 525 of roughly biotech. And that just has developed in the last decade. Now, what are advantages? If there wouldn't be an advantage to work in a cluster, clusters wouldn't form. So there has to be certain advantages. And for an intra-cluster collaboration, the collective efficiencies will drive that clustering, that agglomeration. And you have a dense social network and its high levels of social capital. You will see that the fluctuation of staff between those companies is very high. There's companies that are outside clusters, which was one of my previous employers in Connecticut. We had an attrition rate of anywhere between 2 to 7% year over year. The second employer, we had attrition rates between 25 and 35% in the cluster because people move from company to company. They have a lot more job opportunities in the same field. Now you have the intellectual piece that is really important. You have gains on innovation, knowledge creation, relationships. You have sharing of best practices, and you have complementary assets and skills. So you work together and everybody benefits, synergies. You also have more on the company capital in terms of motivation and productivity, transportation costs. You don't have to travel 2 hours to get to your employer. Usually everything is clustered around. You have the access to suppliers. They try to get into these clusters. You have a lot of new business formation, and that constitutes the economic growth in these clusters. Now, inter-cluster, between clusters, and a lot of people forget about that, the collaboration is very important too. The learning efficiency from smaller emerging clusters driven down through mature clusters is immense. So the quality of external networks and connections you can build in a new cluster will help leverage other cluster strengths and your flexibility because you can move in the direction they move. The industry itself is very hierarchical in cluster locations, with the big players into smaller companies, into startups, and then of course into research that wants to come into startups. And it is important for the smaller clusters to network with mega clusters, or what they call superclusters, for scientific and commercial connections, because you actually want to address similar customers. You want to have similar marketing principles, so you have to know what are the success factors in superclusters. If you go through the literature and if you talk to people who have actually experienced clusters in their formation, there will be roughly 10 preconditions defined that make it important from the very beginning through the growth phases. Number one, and the most important in the early phase, is a strong science base. You need a critical mass of researchers, and you also need the reputation of the researchers to attract the attention. And also, in many cases, you need hospitals or medical schools. We would have the veterinary college here. In many clusters, you have teaching hospitals. Just remind you of Boston, where they have all the hospitals, Toronto, where you have all the teaching hospitals. They are ideal to take whatever you discover in terms of drugs or drug candidates to the next level. You need an entrepreneurial culture. That means you have to have some awareness within the universities and research institutes that the goal is to commercialize something, to bring something that can have market value. You have to have role models of the entrepreneurs, and best to have second-generation entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs that have done it before, that can teach you, that can help you to get things off the ground. Then you need a growing company base. If you have no companies, if you're the first one, you need an anchor or a foothold company that will help you get it started. It's very hard if you just have an academic institution or a research institute to get the first company going. And it's important that you have an ability to attract skilled labor and key actors. There's a critical mass of employment opportunities necessary to do that. People will only relocate, you will only attract skilled labor if they have more than one option to pick from, or if they want to move in their careers, that they have career development opportunities. Otherwise, it will become very difficult to attract them and make big relocations. And it should be an attractive place to live, which we can claim here. You need a skilled workforce. That means you need experienced managers and a trained workforce, and you have to offer training courses at all levels to build and develop your workforce. So that is something that has to accompany a cluster formation. If you can't train them, they will move on where they have opportunities because everybody has career development in mind. And very important is the financing. No money, nothing grows. So you need government input, you need business angels or a venture cap, you need access to finance and capital to grow things. And especially in the biotech field, starting a company and growing a company is extremely expensive because the development cycles are very long. It's not that you can, within 1 or 2 years, have a return on investment. Sometimes it takes 10 to 15 years and more. You need follow-up financing, and you need to have the sources to do that. You need to have the infrastructure. Incubators are important, and they have to be in close proximity to the research organizations so that they can interact properly. You need wet labs in many cases on the premises. You need flexible leasing arrangements. Imagine if you're a startup company, you have so and so much funding, and you get a 15-year lease agreement. All your money goes towards the lease agreement. You don't even know if you're going to be successful. That's not what will work for these kind of companies. If you grow and are successful, you need space to expand, and you need good transportation links. In many cases, an international airport is a prerequisite for those clusters to really grow to a mature level. You need strong networks, internal and external. It's very important that a cluster shares a common aspiration. And that's also why you find many clusters that will focus in a certain area. Now, in biotechnology, about 65% of all the biotechnology companies deal with human therapeutics or drug development. The other 35 are spread over the areas of agriculture, aquaculture, and many other areas, nutraceuticals, functional foods, things we know and we are interested in. You have to find and claim an area where you know you can be competitive and where you have natural strength. And I think we will do that, and I think it was predefined before I came here what our areas and our natural resources would allow us to do. Then you need frequent collaborations, and we're trying to develop that. I know the BioAlliance is very active in that field, and we try to be very active in that field too. That's one of the essential prerequisites. You need supportive government and policies, and we have that here. A lot of clusters struggle with not having the support of government, and I'll go into different models later so you see where it can lead you, but that's a fortunate thing, and you need it not only on a regional, but in many cases on a national level. And you also need supporting business services and large related companies. I spoke about the anchor or foothold companies before. You need those companies because they are interested in many cases to pull knowledge into their company. And a lot of companies in the biotech field don't have the aim to grow to a full-blown company in the market. Their aim is to be sold or to be bought at a certain time, and that's how you recoup your investment. And some of the founders will get very rich. Again, for early cluster, the most important bottom line is you need very strong advanced science base, and you need basic, applied, and in many cases clinical or veterinary research to get there. You must have academic entrepreneurs, and you must reach a critical mass of research activity. One swallow doesn't make the spring, and you need some people that attract attention from the outside to what you want to build. If you don't get that attention, you will not get the money, you will not get the support, and you will not get the skilled workforce. Now, there's different cluster formation models. One model that has historically been very successful in the US is the organic growth. That means there is not a lot of push. There are some companies, like in Silicon Valley, for instance, or in the Bay Area, where they had good ideas, they came together, they started, but it took a long time. If you look at Genentech, it was two people who had an idea, and the venture capital person had to convince the professor that actually you can capitalize on this new technology. Networks and formal and informal are facilitated, and they provoke the exchange among industry, academia, startups, and VCs. You have a strong help in the US with the intellectual property rights that were actually changed with the Bayh-Dole Act in 1980, which helps these companies to protect what they have and to capitalize on it. And there was large private company investment. There was a lot of funds, there was a lot of capital givers that were helping these clusters to grow. One example, and the one I know best, is the Cambridge cluster. There's two clusters, it's Boston and Cambridge. Cambridge itself is in a very small area. It used to be in 2005, it was around 220 companies, so the economy has hit there too. It's about 170 companies today, but they have more than 100 colleges and universities close by, and they have a number of hospitals and the Longwood Medical Center close by. So for human therapeutic companies, for drug development companies, that's an ideal setting. And you have Logan Airport, which is the international airport close by. So from that point of view, that cluster can thrive. In all of Massachusetts area, you have about 660 companies, and they have a funding plan from government. The governor decided in 2007 that they will put $1 billion into their biotech clusters over 10 years, $100 million a year to support and help them grow and sustain them. Now, the other way to do it, once countries realize that there is money in it and that it's prestigious to have them, and that's probably part of the future, they started the Big Bang approach, and that is mostly the European and Asian model, where you pour a lot of money at one point to get it started. You want to get it off the ground fast. The heavy public funding, in many cases, reached billions. Singapore, 2 billions. There's other areas, 5 billions. In Germany, with 3 billions over 10 years. You have success in some countries, not in all. They still have difficulties to commercialize their research because they don't have those serial entrepreneurs. They don't have the people that did it before that can teach and help you learn. And it's probably also due to insufficient quality scientific research. They try to commercialize too early. If you try to do it too early, your failure rate will be higher. So in many cases, there was too much push, and the findings were not ready to make it into the market. But in general, the US has been more entrepreneurial and more successful than Europe over time, but Europe is catching up. And the best example is probably Germany. It's now second behind the US and well ahead of Canada in number of biotech companies. Their push was $3 billion started in 1994. They created 27 clusters and today have 765 companies. It's a prominent example where the government took a strong lead, pushed the money in, organized the clusters, supported them, and gave them a lot of money for basic research and to attract people to a Max Planck Institute, to an EMBL in Heidelberg, to get the top names to help them start the clusters. Strong support for basic research, and it was also strong financial support for the startups, a lot of networks, and they promoted the private-public collaboration. Now, if we look at the models you start with, obviously in the very beginning you have an embryonic phase or an infant phase or the emergence of a cluster. You need a strong science base, I re-emphasize that. You have few small companies. It's not a true cluster yet, it's an emerging one. But the companies have to hold a long-term technology vision together. They have to be in an area that is suitable for the area itself, but also for them in the direction they go. Synergies are not yet realized, sometimes not yet possible, it's too early, but the political support is in place. It matures into a true cluster if it reaches the critical mass again. And it fails if the companies' technologies grow apart. There are some examples where that happened, or if too many companies get bankrupt and you fall below the critical mass again. There's a growth phase where innovation networks begin to form. The company growth is above the industry average, which is very important. If you look at these clusters, more and more companies form, much more than in other areas. Synergies help. It's an increase in employment, and it's a high number of startups. You have specialized labor pools you can draw from. The support infrastructure is being formed. Incubators are important for that. You have a decrease in heterogeneity in the company orientation. And you have cluster organizations formed like we have the BioAlliance here. So that is a very important phase in the growth. I won't talk about sustainment because we're not there yet, and I only have 20 minutes. If you look at the Ernst & Young report for 2009, the province of Prince Edward Island is actually a very small column here, and that prompted us in one of the areas we research in the Center of Biotech Management Research to look at the biotech cluster in PEI. Us means Stephen Casper from the Keck Institute in California, who was here as a Fulbright scholar. It means Adelie McNevin, who works at the University and School of Business with me, and myself. And what we did is we wanted to investigate if a sustainable cluster is emerging in the province and capture some detailed information on the local companies and also see where it's going over time. We interviewed founders and managers of 18 companies on PEI. We only included the ones with discernible R&D capability. We did not include consultant companies because we don't view them as generating the technology and the research. We had an 85-question survey, which was conducted with a semi-structured interviews of about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And we also interviewed some representatives from government, consultancies, and public research organizations. What was evident is we have a strong, cohesive government strategy, and there is a number of instruments for financing and funding available. For local startups, it's ACOA and the province, and there is a number of funding and tax incentives to bring companies here. That is also, if you don't grow organically from the inside, you will try to attract players that are a good match for what you're trying to build and bring them in. So that is an important thing we shouldn't forget, and we also have incentives to do that. We have strong local and Atlantic Canada inter-organizational network that's across the universities, but also across the provinces. That promotes cycles of industrial upgrading, which we need, and companies can easily tap into the other research institutes. So that exchange is working, and it's very important for us because we are not as big as some of the states in the US or in countries in Germany. The strengths of our clusters also contain a focus on natural products and bioactives, things we can grow strong in here. I don't think we need to compete in human therapeutics and in drugs because naturally we would tend to go into other areas where we have natural bases here. We have the Food Tech Center, we have knowledge where we could actually aim into other directions. And these niches will allow us to grow without being diminished or interfered too much by the bigger clusters taking away what we could build, because the fear could also be if you build something that is more attractive to another cluster, it could be relocated there. It helps us guide capacity building investments by the government, which is really good, and we have an attractive labor market. Not so much that we have the labor pool we need once we grow, but we have interesting wages. They're lower than the rest of the industry. So for companies coming here, they can get cheaper labor force. And we have very hardworking people. Everybody here stated that the people they have working for them are extremely dedicated and hardworking. That is a big plus. And we are expanding skill bases through Holland College and the university. Now, if we compare ourselves to Boston, which is an unfair comparison, but I had to do it. We have in place is a check mark, partially in place is a check mark in parentheses, and what we need to create is not there yet. So we have a strong science base, and it is partially in place, and we are growing it. We have some names, and we have some areas where we are in the leading fields. We have an entrepreneurial culture, definitely. We have a growing company base. We wish it to grow faster, but it is growing. We have to create more ability to attract the skilled labor and bring in key actors in industry and science. We have a workforce that is skilled, but it will not be able to meet the needs in case we grow to a substantial mass. We have financing, public, yes, private, not so much. So I think that really has to grow. We have an infrastructure that is there in part, and that's more in the academic and in the research setting. The Biocommons could be an incubator that will contribute to the infrastructure and is important. We have strong networks, but mostly internal. We found that the companies don't have boards in place, and boards with non-executive directors from out of province would be a first start to network externally. And we have in place supportive government and policies. There's nothing to criticize here. And in terms of supporting business services and large related companies, we have Novartis here, we have Genzyme here, but they are not fully integrated in that cluster. And I think that integration has to be promoted somewhat more, and their interest has to be generated. Challenges, pressure to keep investing in both scientific capacity and the training programs. We need both. We have to network outside Canada. If we can't get our cluster on the grid with bigger clusters and foster these interactions, we will not actually be able to harvest what we need in terms of knowledge and possibilities for them. We need stronger corporate governance institutions in the companies, especially the boards, as I mentioned before. And longer term, we need some way to meet the financial market needs of a growing cluster and growing companies. If we can't create that, they will go where the money is. And that is not what we want, because they will grow there definitely, but it will not help the province. But if we can do it, it will be really good. Thank you very much.